So let's move on to what you're doing now.
Hmm.
Let's
Yeah.
talk about the book, Left
Okay.
Out When the Truth Doesn't Fit In. That's a pretty grab you title, you know. Let's talk about the book some. What's kind of going on there?
I was really lucky that yeah, I didn't know, I had this book, I had this concept. I was writing a lot while this was going on because I tend to write and that's what I do. So I put it together pretty quickly, a rough draft, and no one, of course, was going to publish me because of who I was. But I was lucky enough to find TV guest expert Jackie Jordan, who decided, she was upset by the way I was treated and upset, and she kind of put herself professionally on the line to try to get, that out. So I really liked doing the book. I talk about like some of the things that happened, which you'll read about, like, for instance, the Washington Post, um, the way, like, the first question out of that reporter's mouth, Beth Reinhardt, who was, by the way, a Pulitzer Prize winner, and I was so impressed to talk to her. And the first question she said to me was, "You've made an accusation against Joe Biden. Don't you know that's going to hurt his campaign?" And that's how she said it.
Wow.
And it kind of went downhill from there and got really worse. You can read about it in the book. And she had me by the end of it in tears. And which is, I guess, what her goal was. And so did a couple other reporters, but it was just pretty much that attack, just pounce on, you know, on that. And so the writing of the book was cathartic. And also the last chapter has to do with resources and things for survivors. So I felt that it was a way for me to offset that chilling effect that my story had, And yeah, so I'm working on that. And then we're doing the person, Avalon Claire, who's an illustrator who has done a lot of the graphics on my Twitter account that you've seen. She and I are collaborating on a podcast, and we're going to call it Left Out. So that'll come in the spring. And we, we're, again, it's to kind of lift the voices of people that normally, they're going to get squashed like I did, kind of.
What are the main things that society really needs to do to create a much better world for survivors, and then even more importantly, create a society where there are less survivors? That didn't come out right, but I think you know what I mean by that.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Yeah. So that was
I
just a weird
think,
choice of words, but
like men like you, like my brother Colin, men like you that are allies, basically, that want to help women, and in fact, men are victims too. So I don't want to, be gender specific. Men are victims of violence as well, sexual violence. So I think in general, just having more education, more dialogue about it in a real way, like we're having today, an authentic conversation, where we kind of hash it out a little. And but doing it young, that education piece with young people, both, girls and boys, just kind of, bringing through, and again, not to be gender specific, but just talking about all those issues with gender and with power and with control, because sexual assault has more to do with power and control, and so does sexual harassment, right? And you look at Hollywood and you look at what we're being fed as, what I grew up being fed of how I had to be as a female, like what I was supposed to be like. It's pretty, it's pretty awful to be sexualized so young. You're being told to be a certain way. And like one of the things that come through is that value, right? Well, women's value isn't dependent on how they look, or it shouldn't be, right? But I grew up in that environment. So changing that will make a big dent in rape culture, making them access to education, access to legal resources when it does happen, consequences for those actions. And then, I just think that trauma-informed reporters, when they're doing stories about this, like, for instance, Rich McHugh or Ronan Farrow, those are trauma-informed, consent-based reporters. They're trained. Like when I did my interviews with Rich McHugh, when he had to come to the details of the assault, he knew how to ask the question without making me feel horrible. I didn't know if he believed me or not, and that wasn't the point. But like Beth Reinhardt in comparison was almost abusive, right? So I think, it's the way those stories are covered, the way they're handled, that trauma informed is really important. And then education is huge. I think, just having those real dialogues about sexuality and power. And I really still think that what happened with Biden, with me, was more about power and control than anything else.
So, where can people learn more, and where can people pick up your book?
My Twitter handle is at Reade Alexandra, and my book is available at authortarareade.com and also Amazon. And the hardback will be coming out February 15th on Amazon. And this spring, I'll also be doing an Audible book, so it'll be available in audiobooks as well.
And you mentioned a podcast coming up, and you also mentioned some other resources you're putting together for survivors. Are there any other kind of projects you got in the pipeline down the road related to all that you'd like to?
That's the beginning kind of part, but I really want to get more involved with those projects that help with survivor resources, having them available to people depending, not contingent on their income. So you don't have to have, a lot of money to be able to access them. There's some good ones out there, like echotraining.org is a good one with Lou Godbold. She's one of the Weinstein survivors. They help with both sexual assault and domestic violence with education pieces. Rose McGowan has a great album for healing. It uses theta beats. It's called Planet 9. So if you just look that up on SoundCloud or whatever, so I want to do that. I want to kind of raise up artists and writers and other survivors that have things to say, and that'll be the future.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together